She told me, "You're just jealous of our family." I laughed, took a photo, and deleted my will. She called me every day after that. The humidity in Florida has a way of clinging to you, heavy and oppressive, much like my daughter-in-law's expectations. On that sweltering July afternoon during my grandson Leo's 10th birthday party, the air was thick with the scent of chlorinated pool water, expensive sunscreen, and the cloying sweetness of manufactured joy. The thermometer on my phone read 93 degrees, but it felt like 110 in the shade. My name is Clara Peterson, and I was about to discover that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is to give them exactly what they think they deserve: nothing. The party was a spectacle, as all of Chloe's parties were. A bouncy castle shaped like a pirate ship dominated the perfectly manicured lawn of their sprawling Sarasota home, a 4,000-square-foot Mediterranean-style mansion that my late husband's construction company had built from the ground up. Professional landscapers had transformed the backyard into something you'd see in a magazine spread, complete with imported palm trees and an infinity pool that seemed to stretch into the Gulf horizon. A professional magician in a sequined vest was making balloon animals for a gaggle of screaming children, his practiced smile never wavering despite the chaos around him. The parents weren't watching their kids, they were too busy posing for photos with their champagne flutes, trying to capture the perfect shot for their social media feeds. A caterer in crisp white uniforms was serving miniature crab cakes and champagne to the adults, while a separate station offered organic juice boxes and gluten-free cupcakes for the children. It was a production designed not for a 10-year-old boy, but for Chloe's Instagram feed and her carefully curated image of domestic perfection. I sat on a wrought iron bench in the shade of a palm tree, watching the circus unfold around me. The bench was beautiful, hand-forged by a craftsman in Tampa that George had discovered years ago, but Chloe had never bothered to ask about its history. To her, it was just another prop in her perfect home. My son, David, was manning the grill, looking flushed and stressed in his polo shirt that was already damp with sweat. His hairline had receded significantly since his wedding 5 years ago, and there were new lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and mounting pressure. Every few minutes, he'd glance over at Chloe as if seeking approval for his grilling technique. The man who used to fearlessly climb scaffolding 40 feet in the air now seemed terrified of overcooking a hamburger. Chloe floated among her guests like a queen holding court, a vision in a white linen dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her smile was as bright and hard as a diamond, never faltering as she air-kissed the wives of David's colleagues and complimented their children with practiced insincerity. She was the queen of this little kingdom, and I was the dowager aunt they were obligated to invite but preferred to ignore. "Clara, dear, you look lovely today," said Margaret Hendricks, the wife of David's supervisor, settling down beside me on the bench. Her voice carried the genuine warmth that came from decades of Southern hospitality. "This garden is absolutely breathtaking. Did you help design it?" I smiled, appreciating her kindness. "Actually, my husband and I planted most of these trees when we first bought this property for David. That oak over there," I pointed to a magnificent live oak whose branches created a natural canopy over half the yard. "George and I planted that as a sapling 22 years ago." "How wonderful, it must mean so much to see it grown so tall and strong." Before I could respond, Chloe's voice cut through the air like a knife. "Oh, Margaret, you're being too kind. The landscapers completely redesigned everything. We had to remove so many of the old, overgrown plants. The previous design was very dated." Margaret's smile faltered slightly as she realized she'd inadvertently stepped into family tension. She mumbled something about needing to check on her daughter and hurried away, leaving me alone with the sting of Chloe's casual dismissal. My gift to Leo was waiting on the present table, a simple, beautifully illustrated book of classic pirate stories, the same one my late husband, George, used to read to David when he was a boy. I'd spent hours searching used bookstores to find the exact edition complete with the original illustrations by N.C. Wyeth, Inside the front cover, I'd written, "To my dear Leo, may you always have the courage to chart your own course. Love, Grandma Clara." When Leo opened it, his eyes lit up with genuine delight. "Grandma, this is the one Dad told me about, with the pictures of Blackbeard and everything." He flipped through the pages, his face animated with excitement that had nothing to do with screens or batteries. "Dad said you used to read this to him every night when he was my age." For a moment, I saw my son in Leo's eager expression, and my heart swelled with the memory of those long-ago bedtime stories. David used to insist on hearing about Long John Silver every single night and would giggle when I did the pirate voice. But then Chloe swooped in like a hawk spotting prey, her smile tightening into something sharp and predatory. "Oh, that's quaint, Clara, but didn't you see the gift registry? We were hoping for the new virtual reality headset for him, to help with his cognitive development and prepare him for the digital future." She deftly whisked the book away from Leo's hands and replaced it with a brightly wrapped box the size of a microwave. The boy's initial joy was quickly replaced by the hypnotic glow of a screen as he strapped on the VR headset, his real world disappearing behind a wall of technology. The other children gathered around him, mesmerized by the gadget, but something precious had been lost in that moment. The simple joy of imagination that comes from turning pages and discovering new worlds through words and pictures. Later, I was trying to have a quiet word with David by the pool house, away from the chaos of the party. "He really loved the book, honey," I said softly, watching Leo stumble around the yard with the VR headset on, completely disconnected from the beautiful day and the friends around him. His face just lit up when he saw it. "It reminded me of you at that age." David's expression softened for just a moment, and I saw a flicker of the boy who used to beg for just one more story. "I remember that book, Mom. The pictures were incredible, and the way you do all the different voices." Before he could finish the thought, Chloe materialized at his side like a heat-seeking missile, linking her arm through his with a possessiveness that made my skin crawl. "Clara, please don't undermine our parenting choices. We are trying to raise a forward-thinking child, not one stuck in the past with dusty old books and outdated fairy tales." The condescension in her voice was a familiar sting, but this time it cut deeper because David said nothing. He just looked at his shoes and let his wife dismiss not only my gift but the cherished memories we'd shared. "The modern world requires digital literacy, Clara. We're preparing Leo for the future, not living in some romantic past." For 5 years, ever since David married her, I had been treated as a relic. A sweet but irrelevant old woman whose opinions were as dated as her floral print blouses and whose presence was tolerated rather than welcomed. They lived in a house my husband's investments had paid for. Every brick, every tile, every custom fixture had been selected and installed by Peterson Construction. They drove cars his hard work had bought. They sent my grandson to Sarasota Academy, an exclusive private school where tuition alone cost $30,000 a year, all covered by the trust fund George had established. The irony was suffocating. They lived surrounded by the fruits of my husband's labor, sleeping in beds purchased with his money, eating off china he'd bought me for our anniversary, and yet I was the one who was stuck in the past. Every morning, Chloe drank her organic coffee from a machine that cost more than most people's monthly salary, never once acknowledging that the money to buy it came from a man who'd started with nothing but calloused hands and an unwavering work ethic. I decided to take a photograph of the moment, a picture of Leo playing with his new friends by the pool. Despite the VR headset incident, children were still children, and they'd found a way to make a game of it, taking turns with the device while the others splashed in the water. As I raised my phone to capture one of the few genuine moments of joy I'd witnessed all day, Chloe stepped directly in front of me, blocking my view with the deliberate precision of someone who'd perfected the art of control. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Just taking a picture of the birthday boy," I said mildly, trying to peer around her. "He looks so happy playing with his friends." She sighed, a sound of profound theatrical weariness that she'd clearly practiced in the mirror. This is a private event, Clara. I'd prefer you not post pictures on your little Facebook page. It doesn't align with our family's brand and social media strategy. Brand, I repeated, genuinely confused. Chloe, I just want a picture of my grandson. Our brand, she interrupted, her voice rising just enough that several nearby guests turned to look. David's career depends on maintaining a certain image. We can't have random photos floating around the internet without proper curation and approval. I was about to protest when she delivered the final, breathtaking blow. She looked me up and down, her gaze lingering on my simple sundress, one I'd bought at Nordstrom, not exactly bargain basement, and my comfortable sandals. Her expression was that of someone examining something distasteful they'd found on the bottom of their shoe. You know, I think I understand, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was somehow loud enough for David and several other guests to hear. You never had a family like this, did you? A successful husband, a beautiful home, these opportunities for growth and connection. You're just jealous of what David and I have built together. The world went quiet, not just quiet, it went completely, utterly silent. The sounds of children laughing, water splashing, and adults chatting all seemed to fade into a distant hum. I could feel the eyes of the other guests on me, some looking away in embarrassment, others watching with the horrified fascination of people witnessing a car accident. David shuffled his feet and stared at the perfectly grilled hot dogs on his plate, his silence a deafening roar of complicity. He wouldn't defend me, he never did. The man who used to stand up to bullies on the playground, who'd once gotten a black eye defending a smaller kid from a pack of teenagers, couldn't find the courage to defend his own mother from his wife's cruelty. Margaret Hendricks, who'd been standing close enough to hear everything, looked mortified. She opened her mouth as if to say something, then closed it again and hurried away toward the house. A young man I didn't recognize, one of David's newer colleagues, suddenly became very interested in his smartphone, scrolling through it with exaggerated concentration. The woman standing near the pool with her toddler turned her back entirely, pretending to be fascinated by the pool's filtration system. Jealous? She thought I was jealous. Me, the woman who had stood by my husband for 45 years while he built a construction empire from a single pickup truck and a toolbox full of determination. The woman who had managed the books when we couldn't afford a bookkeeper, raised their son when George was working 16-hour days, and held his hand as cancer took his last breath in a hospital room that smelled of disinfectant and broken dreams. The woman who, as the sole executor of his $7 million estate, was the silent, invisible architect of their entire perfect life. But in that moment, something shifted inside me. I didn't get angry. A strange, liberating calm washed over me like a cool breeze cutting through the Florida humidity. I looked at Chloe's smug, beautiful face. She really was beautiful, I had to give her that, and at my son's weak, averted gaze, and I saw them clearly for the first time. They weren't family. They were tenants, living in a world built by a man whose memory they didn't even have the grace to respect. I smiled, not the polite, accommodating smile I'd been wearing like a mask for 5 years, but a genuine, serene smile that came from a place of sudden, crystal-clear understanding. You know, Chloe, I said, my voice carrying a calmness that surprised even me, you might be absolutely right. I raised my phone again, but this time I turned the camera around. I took a selfie. In the background, Chloe's face was a mask of confusion, her perfectly applied makeup unable to hide her bewilderment at my unexpected response. My son was a blur of shame, his face turned away from the camera. The other guests formed a tableau of discomfort and embarrassment. It was a perfect picture, a portrait of the exact moment I decided to set myself free. Thank you, I said, still smiling. You've given me a great deal of clarity about a lot of things. I walked away from them, found a quiet corner by the pool house where George and I used to sit and watch the sunset, and sat down on a small wrought-iron chair he'd placed there just for me. My hands were perfectly steady. I didn't open my banking app. I didn't call my lawyer. I did something much more personal and infinitely more satisfying. My ledger wasn't a book or a series of texts like in those revenge stories you see online. It was my will. A carefully drafted, legally binding document that I had updated just last year with the help of Maria Sanchez, the best estate attorney in Sarasota. It was stored securely in my phone, in my email, and in Maria's files. It named my son David as the sole heir to the Peterson fortune. It detailed the trusts, the properties, the stock portfolio that George had built through decades of 12-hour days and weekend work. It was the blueprint for David's secure, luxurious future and, by extension, for Leo's education and opportunities. I opened the document on my phone. I read through the clauses, the articles, the loving provisions I had made to ensure my son and my grandson would never want for anything. To my beloved son David, who carries forward his father's legacy of hard work and integrity, the words seem to mock me now. What integrity, what legacy? Then with a single satisfying tap, I hit delete. I didn't tear it up dramatically. That felt too theatrical, too much like something Chloe would do for her social media followers. I simply erased it. Poof, gone, wiped from my device, and more importantly, wiped from my heart. Under Florida law, with no will, my estate would not automatically go to my son. It would be subject to probate court, a long, messy, public process where anyone could contest the distribution. But that was a problem for another day. Today was about the quiet, powerful act of taking back my legacy. As I sat there, I could hear the party continuing behind me. Leo's laughter cut through the air. He'd finally abandoned the VR headset and was playing Marco Polo in the pool with his friends. The sound should have made me happy, but instead it filled me with a profound sadness. How many more birthdays would pass before Chloe's influence completely erased the curious, book-loving boy I'd seen just an hour ago? The next morning, I made one phone call. It was to Maria Sanchez, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd built her practice from nothing, much like George had built his business. She understood the value of hard work and the importance of leaving a meaningful legacy. "Maria," I said, looking out at the sunrise over Sarasota Bay from my downtown condo, "I need you to do something for me. I want you to draft a new will, and I want to change the beneficiary completely." Clara, her voice carried concern and confusion. "A change? Is everything okay? Did something happen with David?" "Everything," I said, looking at the selfie I had taken at the party, studying the faces of the people I'd called family for so long, "is finally going to be exactly as it should be." I didn't tell her who the new beneficiary was, not yet. First, I had to build it. 2 days later, David called. His voice was laced with a strange, forced cheerfulness that reminded me of a salesman trying too hard to close a deal. "Hey Mom, Chloe and I were thinking we haven't really spent quality time together since the party. We'd love to take you out to dinner this week. You know that new steakhouse you mentioned, our treat of course." The love bombing had begun. They must have sensed a shift in the atmospheric pressure, a change in my quiet compliance that had served as the foundation of their comfortable life. "That's sweet, dear," I said, watching a pelican dive for fish in the bay below my balcony, "but I'm busy this week." I was busy. I had spent the past 2 days meeting with architects, contractors, and city planners. I'd driven through neighborhoods I'd never visited before, looking at properties for sale with the calculating eye of someone who'd spent decades helping her husband evaluate potential construction sites. I'd found it on my 3rd day of searching, a piece of property for sale on the edge of downtown Sarasota. It was a rundown, forgotten community center that had been closed for nearly a decade due to budget cuts. The city was eager to sell it to someone who would breathe life back into the neglected building. It had good bones. George had taught me to recognize quality construction, a solid roof, and a large, neglected workshop in the back that had once hosted vocational programs for local high school students. The asking price was reasonable, especially for someone with my resources. The building needed work, but it had potential. More importantly, it had history. It had been a place where young people had learned skills, where they'd discovered that they could build something with their own hands. My husband, George, had started his career as a carpenter's apprentice. He'd worked for a gruff old German immigrant named Klaus who believed in the power of working with your hands, in the dignity of building something real and lasting. Clara, George used to tell me, anyone can push paper around a desk or stare at a computer screen. But when you can take a pile of lumber and turn it into someone's home, when you can look at something and say, I built that, that's real wealth. That was the legacy I wanted to honor, not with trust funds for people who saw money as an entitlement, but with something tangible and meaningful. I bought the property with cash. I used $250,000 from my own savings, money that had been sitting in a CD earning pathetic interest rates. I started a nonprofit foundation, filing all the paperwork with the state of Florida and the IRS. I called it the Peterson Project, Building Futures. Our mission was simple but profound: to provide free vocational training in the skilled trades: carpentry, plumbing, electrical work, welding, HVAC installation, to young men and women who didn't have the means for a 4-year college degree or who simply preferred to work with their hands rather than spend 4 years accumulating debt for a degree that might not even lead to employment. We would give them a skill, a trade, a future they could build with their own 2 hands. More than that, we would give them dignity and self-reliance. In a world increasingly dominated by technology and service jobs, there would always be a need for people who could fix what was broken, build what was needed, and create something lasting. The calls from David and Chloe became more frequent as the weeks passed. Mom, we're worried about you. You seem different, distant. Clara, is something wrong? You know you can talk to us about anything. We're family. I was always polite, always distant. I was building something they couldn't understand, something that had nothing to do with brand alignment or social media presence. I hired contractors, some of them men who had worked for George's company over the years. They were thrilled to be part of something that honored his memory. Mr. Peterson was a good man, said Tommy Rodriguez, a master electrician who'd started as George's apprentice 30 years ago. He gave me my first real chance. If this is what Mrs. Peterson wants to do with his legacy, then I'm honored to help. We renovated the community center completely. We installed state-of-the-art equipment in the workshop: table saws, welding stations, electrical training boards, plumbing mock-ups. We created classroom spaces where students could learn the theory behind their trades, and we built comfortable areas where they could eat lunch and study together. The day the new sign went up on the renovated community center, I took another photograph. The Peterson Project, Building Futures. The letters were strong, clean, and honest. Below the main sign, in smaller letters, it read, "Established in memory of George Peterson, Master Builder." That evening, I emailed 2 photos to my lawyer, Maria. The first was the selfie from Leo's birthday party. The second was the picture of my new foundation. The subject line of the email was simple: my new will. The body of the email was even simpler: 100% of the Peterson estate is to be left to the Peterson Project, Building Futures. Please draft the documents accordingly. David Peterson and Leo Peterson will receive nothing. Maria called me within an hour. Clara, are you absolutely certain about this? It's your money, of course, and you have every right to leave it wherever you choose, but this is a significant decision. Perhaps we should meet in person to discuss. I've never been more certain of anything in my life, I said. George built his fortune with his hands and his integrity. This foundation will honor that legacy in a way that actually matters. The next day, as per my instructions, Maria sent a certified letter to David and Chloe. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't an announcement. It was an invitation printed on the law firm's elegant letterhead. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Peterson, you are cordially invited to the grand opening of the Peterson Project, Building Futures, a new charitable foundation established by its founder, Clara Peterson. Mrs. Peterson has also named the project the sole beneficiary of her estate. We would be honored if you would attend this celebration of vocational education and community service. The phone call came exactly 1 hour and 17 minutes after the letter was delivered. I know because I was watching the clock, curious about how long it would take for them to process what they'd read. It was David. He was sputtering, his voice cracking with rage and disbelief in a way I hadn't heard since he was a teenager. A foundation, the sole beneficiary, what does that mean? What about me? What about Leo? Mom, you can't do this. This is insane. I can, I said calmly, settling into my favorite chair with a cup of tea. And I have, it's my estate, David. I'm allowed to be jealous of how it's spent. The line went quiet for a moment as he processed my words, recognizing them as an echo of his wife's cruel assessment. When he spoke again, his voice was desperate, pleading. This is Chloe's fault. She's the one who said that. I'll talk to her. We'll apologize. We'll make this right. This isn't about an apology, David, I said, watching a boat sail across the bay in the distance. This is about character. Your father built his legacy with his hands, with integrity and hard work. He respected people who contributed something meaningful to the world, you and your wife. You respect brand alignment and virtual reality headsets and social media presence. You don't value his legacy, so you are no longer entitled to it. I hung up. The phone rang again immediately and again and again. David called, Chloe called. They left frantic, pleading voicemails. They left angry, threatening ones. David's voice, Mom, please, you have to listen to reason. Leo needs that money for his future, for his education. Chloe's voice, Clara, this is completely vindictive and cruel. We can contest this. We will contest this. They called every day for 2 weeks. I never answered. Instead, I let their desperation fill up my voicemail while I focused on something infinitely more rewarding, preparing for our first class of students. We had received over 200 applications for 20 spots. Young people from all walks of life, recent high school graduates who couldn't afford college, military veterans looking for new careers, single mothers hoping to learn a trade that would provide stable income. Each application told a story of someone who wanted to build something better for themselves and their families. The grand opening of the Peterson project was a modest affair, deliberately so. We had coffee and donuts from a local bakery, the same bakery where George used to buy treats for his crew on Friday mornings. The mayor came and said a few words about the importance of skilled trades to the community. A reporter from the Sarasota Herald-Tribune took some pictures and interviewed a few of our incoming students. Our first class of 20 students, eager, hopeful young people with calloused hands and determined expressions, was there, their faces shining with possibility. This isn't just about learning a trade, I told the small gathering. This is about understanding that your worth isn't determined by how much money your parents have or what college you can afford. Your worth is determined by what you can create, what you can fix, what you can build with your own 2 hands. In the middle of the ceremony, as I was cutting the ribbon across the main entrance, a sleek black Mercedes pulled up to the curb. The same car I'd helped them buy 2 years ago when David got his promotion. David and Chloe got out, looking like actors who had wandered onto the wrong movie set. They stood at the back of the small crowd, clearly uncomfortable among the blue-collar families and young people in work boots and jeans. Chloe was wearing what I recognized as a designer outfit, probably $1,000 worth of carefully curated casual wear that screamed money and status. David wore khakis and a polo shirt, looking pale and stressed. Dark circles under his eyes suggested he hadn't been sleeping well. After the speeches, I was talking to a young woman named Maria Santos, not Maria the lawyer, but a 19-year-old who wanted to be a welder. Her father worked construction, and she'd grown up watching him come home tired but proud of what he'd built that day. My dad always says that welding is like painting with fire, she told me, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. I want to learn how to create things that will last forever. That's when Chloe approached me, her composure completely shattered. Gone was the confident woman who'd humiliated me at Leo's birthday party. This Chloe looked haunted, desperate, like someone who just realized that the ground beneath her feet was nothing but air. Please, Clara, she whispered, her voice trembling in a way I'd never heard before. Don't do this to us, to David. He's your son. This will destroy us. We've already had to take Leo out of private school. David's been demoted because the stress is affecting his work performance. Please, I'm begging you." I looked at her, and for the first time I didn't see a villain. I saw a scared, hollow person who had built her entire identity on a foundation of money she hadn't earned and status she hadn't achieved through her own efforts. She was facing the terrifying prospect of having to create a life based on her own merit rather than her husband's inheritance. "I'm not doing anything to him, Chloe," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "I'm giving him a gift, the same gift I'm giving these students, the opportunity to build something for himself, to discover what he's actually capable of when he can't rely on someone else's money. It's the most valuable inheritance I could possibly leave him." I turned back to Maria Santos. "Now, tell me more about your passion for metalwork." Chloe stood there for a long moment, invisible and irrelevant for perhaps the first time in her adult life. Then she turned and walked away, her designer heels clicking on the pavement like a countdown timer marking the end of an era. David approached me later as I was locking up the building. The other attendees had gone home, and the setting sun painted everything in golden light. He looked older somehow, as if the past few weeks had aged him years. "I understand now, Mom," he said quietly, his voice stripped of all pretense. "I stood by and I let it happen. I was weak. I was a coward. I let her treat you like that because it was easier than standing up to her, easier than risking conflict in my marriage." "Yes," I said simply, "you were." He flinched as if I'd slapped him, but he didn't argue. Is there any way back from this, any way to earn your forgiveness?" I thought for a moment, studying his face in the fading light. I saw traces of the boy who used to help his father sort nails by size, who'd been so proud when George let him use the grown-up tools. "The foundation offers rolling admissions," I said finally. "The carpentry program has one open spot. Classes start at 7 a.m., Monday through Friday, no special treatment, no shortcuts. You'll start at the bottom and work your way up just like your father did." He looked at me, his eyes full of a pain that was, for the first time in years, completely real and unguarded. He didn't answer immediately. He just nodded slowly and walked to his car, not the Mercedes I noticed, but an older Honda that had seen better days. "I don't know if he'll show up Monday morning. It doesn't matter. The choice is his, and for the first time in his adult life, he'll have to make it based on his own character rather than his expectations of inheritance." As I drove home that evening, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete and utter peace. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I was building something beautiful and meaningful, something that would outlast all of us. 3 months later, I received a photograph in the mail. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting on the envelope. It was a picture of a small wooden box, not fancy but clearly handmade with care and precision. The joints were perfect, the finish smooth and even. On the bottom, burned into the wood with a wood-burning tool, were the words, "Made by David Peterson, Peterson Project Class of 2025. Inside the envelope was a note. "Mom, I finished my first project today. I'm not the same person I was 3 months ago. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me, but I wanted you to know that I'm finally learning what Dad tried to teach me all those years ago. Thank you for giving me the chance to find out who I really am. Love, David." I kept the photograph on my refrigerator right next to the picture from Leo's birthday party. 2 moments, 2 choices, 2 completely different futures. I am not jealous of their family. I am building a new one. A family of doers, of builders, of young people who understand that a life of value is measured not by what you inherit, but by what you create with your own 2 hands. They thought my love was a blank check. They didn't realize it was a blueprint, and I had finally found the right people to build it with. 6 months after the foundation opened, Leo came to visit me. He was alone. Apparently, he'd taken the bus, something that would have horrified his mother in the old days. He looked older, more serious, but there was something in his eyes that I hadn't seen at his birthday party: genuine curiosity about the world around him. "Grandma," he said, looking around my condo with new eyes, "Dad told me about what you did, about the foundation and everything." I braced myself for anger, for accusations, for the parroting of his mother's bitterness. Instead, he surprised me. I think it's really cool, he said. Dad's been teaching me some carpentry basics. Look what I made. He pulled out a small wooden whistle from his pocket. It was rough around the edges, clearly the work of a beginner, but it was functional and he'd made it himself. That's beautiful, Leo, I said, and I meant it. Your grandfather would have been so proud. I want to learn more, he said. Mom says it's beneath me that I should focus on preparing for Harvard, but I like building things. I like seeing something come together from nothing. Then you're a Peterson, I said, pulling him into a hug. Your great-grandfather started with nothing but his hands and his determination, and he built an empire, not because he wanted to impress anyone, but because he loved the work itself. As I write this, it's been 2 years since that birthday party that changed everything. The Peterson Project has graduated 68 students, and our job placement rate is 97%. We're expanding to offer programs in automotive repair and renewable energy installation. David completed his carpentry certification and now works for a small local contractor, earning a third of what he used to make but coming home each day with the satisfaction of having built something real. Chloe filed for divorce 8 months ago. She couldn't handle the transition from country club wife to the spouse of a working tradesman. She moved back to her parents' house in Atlanta and, according to David, spends most of her time complaining on social media about how she was betrayed by people she'd trusted. The irony is lost on her, but not on me. Leo spends most weekends with me now, and we're reading through that book of pirate stories together. He still enjoys his video games, but he also knows how to use a hand saw and can identify different types of wood by their grain patterns. More importantly, he's learning that true wealth isn't about what you can buy, but about what you can create and contribute to the world. If you have ever been told your life is small, if your love has been mistaken for weakness, if you've been dismissed as irrelevant by people who mistake your kindness for foolishness, then maybe you'll understand why I smile when I look at that selfie from the party. They didn't see a jealous old woman, they saw an opportunity, and in doing so they gave me one in return, the opportunity to remember who I was and build a legacy that was truly priceless. Subscribe to Grandma True Stories, because here we know that the best inheritance isn't money, it's character. And that's something you have to build for yourself.